welcome back to the How to Get an Analytics Job podcast. So today I'm going to be interviewing my new friend Lee. So Lee's actually in a very similar situation as I am. Lee, you're consulting and you're also teaching, which is interesting. I was just talking to someone about how interesting it is having one foot in academia and then one foot in kind of the business world.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really interesting place to be in. But
third foot in the grave.
Yeah, basically. I mean, I'm working like all the time right now. But how about, so we're going to talk about data storytelling, but before we get into that, I gave you kind of a quick intro, but why don't you tell us a little bit more about your journey and kind of where you fit into the analytics space?
Yeah. So I have a consulting company, which is me, called Decision Biz. And our focus is on really helping clients build what we call an army of trustworthy decision makers. And we go that route because that's really the end goal of all of this work, whether, analytics, data visualization, storytelling, however you want to put all those pieces together. The ultimate goal is to help people make decisions and to make more people that can make decisions, because it's very limited today. If you think about how most companies are set up, there's very few people who really make the decisions, and having more access to data, becoming better at analytics will enable more people to be able to do that, which should help companies perform better overall if more people can be involved with that kind of work, in addition to just whatever their kind of line role is.
Gotcha. All right. So are you doing a lot of Tableau? Like, how are you implementing that? Like, how are you making people better decision makers? So they're using data to drive their decisions?
Yeah. So I'm very involved with the Tableau world, but if you think about the idea of, let's just call it data storytelling for the moment, and we can get into more about what that means. If you think about it to the way we might tell a story today, if let's say we were going to sit down and write a story and we were going to use Microsoft Word to type it all out, I would use the same kind of skills that I use to type it out as I would if I was going to write it on a piece of paper with a pen or a pencil, whatever that mechanism is. And so I look at data storytelling the same way, that there's a set of principles that you have to learn. And then you should be able to apply them to any type of way of doing the writing. Now, of course, if you're doing it with software, every software has its own way of doing things. And so you might be able to do certain things in one and then the other, from that, in terms of how you could enhance the story from that perspective. But you need to know the basics to be able to do it. And it's not about whether you know where the items are on a menu or things like that in the software to make the story make sense.
Gotcha. All right. So you're in the consulting world. Tell us a little bit about what's been your experience. So you're a professor who's teaching a Tableau class at NYU right now, right?
Yeah.
How's that going?
Well, it just finished, so that's a good thing. All the grades just went in this week, and as you know, that the work of grading projects is a lot that goes on behind the scenes outside of just all the preparation for the course. It's really kind of interesting, in fact, because I wasn't really involved with education until maybe about 7 or 8 years ago in any fashion. And I had a lot of customers asking me if I could teach them the framework that I had developed around data storytelling. And I wasn't sure that I could, because teaching somebody how to do something that is not the same as you doing it. You have to really be able to break it down into a way that you could explain it. And so that's really where my kind of journey, if you want to call it that, into education happened. And then the more I got involved with teaching that program and developing an online portion of that over the last couple of years. And then just about a year ago, a friend of mine who also teaches a data visualization class at NYU, referred me over there. There was one of the professors was leaving, and they went through the whole interview process like you would for any other job. And so I've been teaching there for about a year as an adjunct. And kind of in parallel to that, I got involved with another university, University of Chicago. I'm actually developing a program for them for their capstone analytics program,
Oh,
which
cool.
is not quite data storytelling, but it's a program on communications. And it's all around data, but it's around their analytics work and how to be more persuasive in
Ooh.
somebody who's gone through all the work of crunching the data and running algorithms and coming up with some kind of recommendation. But how do you then present that to, in this case, it's a client, it's a real external company they're working with. How do you present it to them in a way that's not just about the project, right? We got all the data and we cleaned it and we ran all these different algorithms, right? It's more of,
I would
okay,
say that's a
that's interesting.
huge problem. Most
Yeah.
analysts do not know how to. Well, I think that what the general kind of, I guess, conventional wisdom is you need to be an effective communicator, which I think falls short of what it really means. Like what you
Mhm.
really need is influence skills.
Yeah,
You need to have some sales skills, essentially.
it is.
Have you heard of this book called Pitch Anything?
Pitch, I don't have that one.
So this guy was, I think he is putting together like venture capital deals, and he was talking
Mhm.
about how when he is selling the deal, he's selling the idea and kind of like
Mhm.
the end product to where what happens in a lot of these deals is they get completely derailed because an analyst will come in and start talking about hyper specific numbers. And then the investor, the one who has the dollars, just gets totally bored and tunes out. And then that feeling they had of like, oh, well, I could invest $100 million in this project and all this good
Mhm.
can come away. Instead of focusing on that big picture, the the analyst is saying, yeah, well, according to this algorithm, we can do blah, 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 blah. And
Right.
it almost intimidates them, and it just like completely deflates that excitement they have. And I think that's something that a lot of technical people really struggle with, is that they don't understand how decision makers, executives, business owners, like what resonates with them.
Yeah. And I go through this a lot, and the first thing I tell them is it's not your fault. The reason I say that is you're not born knowing how to do that.
Mhm.
And if nobody teaches you how to do that, how would you know, right? You had somebody teach you the algorithms and the number crunching side of it. So that's why you know how to do that. But if no one ever taught you some of those kind of communication skills or persuasion skills or selling skills, how would you know? And so
Right.
there's for some reason there's this, I guess, expectation that people just will be know how to do that. And it's completely one unrealistic, and it's unfair to those people, right? That
It's
they
not
should be
concrete.
expected to know it.
It's really hard to teach sales.
Hmm.
So before I went back to get my MBA, I sold insurance 100% commission door to door.
Wow.
So there are some people who were just naturally gifted at it, and they
Hmm.
just had the gift of gab. Also, too, they had like a network already built up. But there's sales training, and there seems to be, I don't, a lot of it seems woo woo and not concrete, to where you can say, all right, I have X amount of Tableau skills, or I know advanced Excel. You can't really say
Hmm.
that, oh, I have a mid tier sales acumen. Like it
Right.
doesn't really break down that way. And I think a lot of analysts are just kind of intimidated, or not even intimidated. Maybe they just devalue it. And I'm like, what's your take on that?
Yeah. I mean, part of it is trying to teach, not trying to turn them into salespeople. I think is more of helping them change their mindset
Right.
from, yeah, I'm going to tell you all about this, and understanding, and that essentially the when you're in this case with the students, that whoever they're working with assumes that they're good at what they're doing. They
Mhm.
assume that that the university has taught you how to go through the numbers and do the evaluations and so forth. So all the stuff that they want to talk about, the client is kind of like, yeah, I don't, number one, like you said, I don't necessarily need to know it. One, it might intimidate them and they might tune out because they don't know. If they knew all that, they wouldn't need you to do the work for them.
Right.
And so telling somebody who's just spent 6 months to 9 months working on a project that basically no one wants to hear about the project, what they want to hear about is what's in it for me.
Right.
How is it going to help me make money, save money, change my business? And that's what they need to focus on. And then they can talk about some of the other pieces, but you certainly can't lead with that.
Yeah. And I think kind of the way that I think about it is I start with the end recommendation. So business owner, I think you should do X, Y, Z. And then if it's surprising to them and they might push back and say, hey, that's not how we typically run our business. Then you get into some more detail. And then if they really continue to push back, you can kind of pull back the onion and get deeper and deeper into the nuance of it. But you don't start there. I think a lot of analysts think about it flipped, because what impresses them is something that is super complex and takes hours and hours of time to, like, I don't know, craft the nuance out of it, to where business owners, they don't have enough time. They want a decision and they want to know the risk. They want to know the potential return. It's almost like kindergarten math. Like they want to know, like, high level, 5,000 foot view, where are we headed?
Right. Yeah. And that goes back to the whole idea of influencing and communication and even the selling aspect of that, which is understanding that that's what's important, right? Like you said, they don't understand what you're trying to do. And that's why even this idea of data storytelling is in some ways a bit dangerous, because what does that even mean? And if you talk to a lot of people, they'll all give you probably a different answer as to what a data story is, right? It's just a kind of a generic term, which means you have data and you want to tell people about the data. But how you do that and what the goal of that is can be very different. And I think that's a lot of problem we run into in the space that I operate in. Even when you talk about things like data literacy and data culture, there's all these terms that are thrown out that I think have a lot of potential. There's a lot of merit in them to get people thinking, but they're just used and when they don't have something back behind it, then it doesn't gain traction, right? Just the same way, even data visualization, a lot of people think, oh, data visualization, I make charts. Yeah, any software can make charts, but you can still make bad charts with that software. It's not like, I always joke that I wish, when I did something, you mentioned Tableau, and I'm the biggest Tableau supporter, right? But there's certain things you can do in any software that are technically possible, but not necessarily a good idea. And I always say to people, I wish there was when I did something in Tableau, or somebody did something in Tableau, it came up with a little box and it said, are you really sure you want to do that? Right. And it might tell you why you didn't, what you should think of. It shouldn't just say that, right? But give you some options or some reasoning behind it. Because again, people don't know. And there's almost an assumption that if the software is letting me do it, it must be okay. Because why would it? It would, if it's smart, it would stop me from making a pie chart with 17 slices on it, and think, right?
The pie chart, it's the cardinal sin of analytics right there, visual analytics.
Yeah. So, but it lets me, so probably okay.
We're having some activity in the chat. So Tim Leesman, he's a podcast friend, and he actually runs Code for Greensboro, which is an analytics organization here locally. He said, isn't that a famous book, Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten? So I don't know, maybe. And then we got Raj, who was a PhD student. Akash, I don't know if he's been on here, but Akash, you said you have a question, so feel free to ask us a question in the live chat, and we'll circle back around to it whenever we can. But all right, so talking about visual storytelling, are there principles that you like? Have you thought through? Like, okay, so the whole thesis of this podcast is how to get an analytics job, and I've like distilled down there are 4 bullet points of getting an analytics job. Number 1 is business acumen. Number 2 is analytics hard skills. Number 3 is personal branding, and then number 4 are your soft skills. So like those are the 4 guiding principles of are you working on these 4 things? Because if all you're doing is focusing on hard skills, which I don't know why that tends to be where people start. It's like they just grow that muscle huge, and then they don't know anything about business. They have no way of showing off their knowledge, and they have no soft skills. They can't even talk about it. Like, are there, so circling back to visual analytics, are there any principles that kind of guide your thought process throughout that?
Yeah, I think it actually in some ways goes back to that point about selling. A big part about selling is asking a good question and listening. And I find that a lot of people in our field want to just talk. I found this in the data, and and it even goes to the business side of it, which is probably like you, I work with a lot of different industries, and I don't really know much about any of them. Some I don't know anything about when I start, and I don't intend to learn a lot about them. What I need to know is enough to get the job done. Don't need to be an expert, right, in a particular field. I just need to ask you the right kinds of questions and kind of pull out the information from you. And again, that's a kind of a sales skill, right? Where
it's active listening.
Active listening and asking the right and thinking about the kinds of questions you want to get out of somebody. And I think that goes to the soft side, where on the job, a lot of people who are in data tend to be, I'll call them order takers. What do I mean?
Yeah.
Somebody comes in, it could be your boss, it could be your client outside the company, whatever it is, and says, I need a bunch of data on this, and this, or, I need to know about these things. And then you go and do it. And you never really stop to ask why, because there's a mentality like, well, they're the boss, they're the client, I can't ask them why. And my argument is you have to ask them, because you know what happens when you don't. What happens is you always come back and they go, that's not what I wanted.
Or
even though that's like what they asked for, but it's not what they wanted, which is not the same thing. It's
a convoluted solution to where you're like, oh, yeah, I could click this mouse here and then toggle this over, and then here you go. It's that took me a while, because when I first started consulting, I was essentially, it hit. I'm so stubborn. It took me probably a year to like get through my thick skull that being an independent consultant who is just seeking out clients who already think they know what they want is very, very much different than finding a client where they're like, okay, we have all this data and we know that we need to use it, but we don't know how. So kind of being like an active listener and taking a more consultative, critical thinking driven approach to consulting, you come up with much more sophisticated solutions to where if you're an order taker, you're having someone who is not as data literate as you conceptualize the projects, to where they don't know what the capability is of the tools. They don't know the conventional wisdom. They don't know what data is or is not available. So that is a huge one that I think a lot of people, and that seems like a nuance point going from entry level to mid to senior level, because I think when you're first starting out, you should absolutely be an order taker. Because if you come in and you're like, hey, Mr. President of this organization, I'm a 21-year-old recent grad, but I think you're doing your business all wrong. Right. You're going to look like a buffoon, Like there's a certain level to that. But yeah, I think that like, how did you go about like hitting that realization?
Probably by just being frustrated of going through that as, someone. And I didn't get into analytics in the early part of my career. I got involved with it kind of 10, 15 years in, because I got more involved with working on the internet, and we were trying to figure out how do we know that what we're doing works. And
Mm,
the internet was really the first time you could measure things better than the
right.
typical kind of transactional information that you could get. And so it was a bit uncharted in terms of what we should even be doing and how would we do that. And so I was a little bit more seasoned, I think, in terms of the working with people, and it wasn't out of the gate, but I did see that there was not a lot of thinking in terms of how to present that information. It was just chart after chart and cramming lots of pictures onto a page, and huge PowerPoint decks with just slide
Mhm.
after slide of charts. And I was like, what do we, number one, it just took a ton of effort to create those things, right? I mean, you would have people, and you still hear it today, so it hasn't gone away. People would say, well, I have to do a monthly readout, and I have to start mid-month to get it ready for the
Wow.
or it's already the end of the month and I'm doing last month's report because it takes me 2 or 3 weeks to do it. And you just sit there and say, that is insane. I mean, just from an operational standpoint. And so I was thinking through a lot of that to try to find, well, why are we doing that? And this is, it just doesn't make sense. We have to have a better way to do this, just from a personal perspective of not driving yourself nuts, and from a business perspective of actually doing something that has some value besides creating a report. I mean, the report, you spend all that time on a report that either comes in too late or isn't really getting the point across of what you need. Why do it? There's really
Isn't
no
that the
reason.
definition of high quality data? It needs to be accurate and timely. If it
Yeah.
doesn't come on time for you to make the decision, then it's worthless.
Yeah. Well, just as a quick aside, the same thing goes for, you hear a lot of time people say, I need that data in real time. And if you say, well, what decisions will you make with it in real time? They go, oh no, we still just do a monthly review. So then you don't
Mhm.
need it real time. And sometimes they understand that and sometimes they don't. But it's that same kind of principle of understanding where it's going to fit into the flow. But that one always gets me.
That's ridiculous. All right, we got Dan Sanchez.
Yeah.
Okay, this is relating back to your comment about using the tool to its like maximum level of sophistication. So he said, Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park, your data scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, that's a great metaphor. And then, all right, here's a good question. So Noor's asking, what are the right questions? Are there a set of basic questions, or does this just come from experience?
That's, I was going to say, that's a great question. So
Speak
the
it up.
answer to that is both. There's some things to ask, and then it definitely comes from experience. There's no doubt about that. But when I say experience, I mean more the practice of asking the questions and getting
Mm,
comfortable asking the questions, because again, it goes back to that thought of they're the boss, they're the client, and I'll just do what they say, and I can't go against that to that. They see it as going against it when it's just asking a question. So I have this thing I call the magic question. And I call it that because it kind of changes the game, but it's really quite simple. But it goes in different versions depending on kind of my mood or how you perceive the situation. But it's something as simple as, you know, hey John, I know we have that information. It's not a problem to get it, and we could probably make some pretty good looking dashboards from that. But before I just go off and start doing some work. I was just wondering, what is it that you're looking for in there that would cause you to, what kind of decision are you looking to make from it, or what kind of action do you think you might take from that? And it's that is the way to start opening up the conversation. So you're not really questioning whether what they're asking for is useful
You just
or
want
not.
clarification.
Yeah.
Can you clarify? Like, I need to understand what. So I've thought about this a lot, actually. This specific point, I would almost frame it of like, what game are you playing? What's the scoreboard metrics? Like, what's going to move the needle in what you want? And then let me know that, and then we can get that key performance indicator up at the top, and then we can break down, okay, what are the other things? What are the levers we can pull? So, for example, if it's sales, well, what are some different things we could target? Well, maybe the categories, maybe sales by state, maybe there's a certain time of the month where sales spike, so that we can focus our marketing or sales efforts to optimize. So
exactly.
I think that's what would you call that? Just effective framing?
Yeah, you could call it's framing. To me, it's just it's a variation of what do you want, right? And it's trying, it's almost one of the other, actually, if you talk about framing, here's a different idea that I go through is and this gets into a whole framework that I created, and we won't get into the whole thing. I call it design to act. And again, you get that word act in there, because to me, the action is what you end up doing is ultimately what matters. But part of the model, the frame behind that, is to think about your work of ultimately, say, creating dashboards, right? Because that's that might be the output, the kind of quote unquote physical output. Think about that not as a project, but a product. Okay.
Interesting.
Right. And so if I was to go on Amazon and buy that, what should it do for me? When I go on Amazon, I'm trying to buy something that achieves something specific for me. It might be to, a pair of shoes. Well, I need those shoes for a specific reason. I'm not, each shoe has something different it does for me, right? A sneaker versus a boot versus a hiking shoe. If I need to buy something for my kitchen, right? If I need to, peel fruits and vegetables versus a pot, right? I'm not going to buy a pot to do that, right? And it's the same thing with what we do. So you want to understand what is the use of this dashboard going to be? And if you put yourself in this product mindset, I think it really changes things, because you think about all of the things that go into it. And so the reason I bring that up is because if you come to me and say, I need you to build me a product, what is that supposed to do for you versus make me a dashboard or get me the data kind of a thing? It puts you in a different frame of mind on how you approach all of the work of doing it. And it might help people think about how they want to approach this, right? If I come back to you and say, why I'm asking you these questions, I think it makes a huge difference.
Yeah. So you're essentially, instead of just being someone who's jotting down notes and saying, all right, you want this, you want that, you want that, you are a product designer.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, then, it's a much more active approach to getting to the bottom of things. Like, I think a lot of people, and maybe this is more of an entry level thing, is they're doing a lot of busy work, and they don't really know why they're doing it, but they just need to like check the box. One thing that I think a lot of people struggle with is, how do you get out of that frame? Because I think a lot of people will just leave and get a new manager who sees them differently. I mean, that's one effective way of doing it, is completely wiping the slate clean and saying, okay, because the first person who hires you, they see you, at least they have the frame, they have a mental model of you of like, oh, well, when I first met, XYZ, they knew nothing about analytics. but then you get a promotion, or you move to a company, and then the next manager sees you, the baseline is much higher.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're much more likely to take insight or just open to your suggestions. Do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, it kind of, and there's just two sides to this. One is what I mentioned briefly in the beginning, I think comes from the educational side. So it's even like you said, the new person. Well, if they're just coming out of school, the school is taught all of those hard skills. They focused on teaching you how to use Excel or some other software, and to use R and Python and what have you, right? They didn't teach you any soft skills. They just focused on how to do those. So that's one thing that I think should be taught more, right? Is not focusing just, and I think schools are starting to realize that. I've been working with several, and they're starting to see that side of it, right? That, hey, in order for our students to be effective and for their employers to see that, they need to do more than just be good at the hard skills. That's like almost the easy part in a way.
Right.
So that's part one. I think the
Wait,
other
before you
side
go on
is,
to that, I
yeah,
do have an anecdote. So I went to a Tableau user group last night, and I was
Mhm.
sitting next to a hiring manager at a very large company, who it kind of manages like the Tableau infrastructure. And he was saying that he is currently holding rounds at like the third rounds of interviews, and he had a candidate had a master's degree from one of these top level universities. I mean, top tier prestige. And he said, like, we were very impressed with where she came from, but there was no soft skills, and no understanding of like the business. And he said I had to just strongly not recommend her, because it was like she had this huge stack of like technical acumen after technical acumen, but then he simply asked, like, well, how would you use Tableau to solve a problem? And she couldn't even answer that question. I mean, that's such a base level, like, what? I mean, how it seems like it's a big miss right now, teaching, teaching people how to effectively use technology from a university setting.
I think it's just going to probably get worse
You think
because
so?
I think because there's even more of a focus on technology coming out of, schools these days, with all of the talk about, machine learning and artificial intelligence. There's just so much growth in that area that I think students probably also feel like they need to learn that. So there's a kind of a push-pull, right? The school wants to attract students, right?
I think
Based
they're
on what
doing a terrible job of that. I think people are dropping out of, especially these like very, very expensive schools, because you
well,
can learn machine learning for free on YouTube.
yeah, but that's why I said that I think the hard skills are in some ways are easier than the soft skills,
Right, right.
but I think you can integrate them too. And I think also that's it's how you teach it. So for example, my class at NYU is called Visual Analytics with Tableau.
Okay.
Tableau, it's not Tableau for visual analytics.
Okay, so it's the focus is on getting the job done, not
Right.
here's where all the bells and whistles are on Tableau.
So it shows them how to do certain things in Tableau. So you're learning Tableau, but you're
Mhm.
learning it in the context of scenarios, right? Oh, well, hey, if I want to understand this, okay, how would we do that in Tableau? And how would we enhance it based on things like interactive analysis? Okay, we would do this. And so it doesn't start with, oh, well, when you want to build a chart in Tableau, you do this. It's, oh, I want to achieve this. Oh, well, to do that in Tableau, you would want to think about it this way. And you could do it three other ways by also. It's not just one way. And that gets back to this idea of communication and writing skills. Uh, if you think about visual writing the same way we do as writing with words and sentences, you have a vocabulary and you can string together words and sentences to get the same exact point across, but using completely different versions of that, right? And you can do the same thing visually. You can get the same point across or the same data across visually, but depends what kind of effect you want to have with that, or how you want to frame the message. So thinking about visuals as, writing components versus the chart. It's like, okay, this chart, but this chart also might be working with another chart on the page, not necessarily a standalone. So you're building out that story. So I think it comes. So that's one side. So we talked about, that's kind of the school side. The work. The other side is from the employer side, is that you have to build that kind of thinking internally as well, right? That you want to encourage people to ask questions, and maybe that's part of the onboarding process at your employer is, especially as companies say, we want everybody to work with data. Data is strategic. Again, that's a whole thing. We could get on a whole discussion about what that means. Data is strategic.
Or if they don't trust the data in an organization, they're not going to listen to you. They're going to say, okay, that's great, but like your data is wrong, so I don't care at all about this.
Yeah,
and also too, I think what's interesting is balancing intuition versus data, because I think that both sides of that have their downfalls. Because if someone has been in an industry for 30 years, they know something and there's some intangible value there. But if they're not, where I think the data plugs in is that, well, all these industries are constantly changing. So that might give you some indicator of where things are headed. But I think a lot of people totally discount the intuition.
Well, I think that's also part of, when you get back to that kind of line of questioning I was describing, part of that is to tap in, not as much just to intuition, but your knowledge, right? If I come and ask you those questions, that's tapping into things you know about the business, right?
Right.
Right. We want to pull that out. We want to be able to use that and not just have it.
People capital? Human capital, I think that's what they're calling that.
Yeah, I mean, part of it's human capital, part of it's just that, and it's not just at that company, right? It's within the industry. It's your experience, right? And I think that's what people call intuition. And intuition, I think it's really more experience than, intuition sounds like, oh, I see what's coming. I see the stars lining. My intuition says this is what. Right. Gut. Right. It's really your experience that's speaking. And when you see something,
I think it's also lateral thinking too.
Yeah.
Like your intuition, it's like, oh, this has happened before. So therefore this probably is going to happen next.
Right.
Which if it's
happened, it's based on something. It's not just like gut where I think. It's like you've seen it before, or something like it. It's based in something substantial.
Right.
And I think that term gut is probably the wrong term that got associated to things, right? Because gut just makes it sound like, this is kind of what I think, when it's really, it's probably very little of that, and really more like, I have a feeling I know where this is going, right? And that's based on what you've already gone through and may have suffered before. And I think that's where, if the businesses can create a culture, and I use that term culture as hard, give people the flexibility, give them the training, give them the expectation that you will think this way and you will ask these questions, and that it's the right thing to do. It's not being disrespectful. It's actually being respectful. I respect your knowledge, right? And I want to incorporate that into what we do.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like I know it all,
This is interesting. So we got a question. Would you say that intuition equals experience, or is somehow related? Like, what's the relationship there?
I don't know if it I don't know if it equals.
I would say intuition comes from experience.
I'd say intuition comes from experience. Yeah,
Which
I could definitely see that.
So, okay, this is bear with me. This is a little bit of a tangent here, but I was thinking about putting together a poll on LinkedIn and saying, should your college professor have run a business? Because I think that what you get in the academic setting is I've read 20 stories about someone implementing a marketing campaign. But for example, I mean, this semester, so I launched my learning platform over the summer, and we're using that as a tool to basically do what you're doing in your visual analytics class. We're using Tableau to study the data to come up with recommendations on how to run it better.
Smart.
So over the past 3 months, I've spent $2,000 and had 0 sales come from that. So I know what that feels like on a guttural level, like going back to gut and instinct.
Yeah, right.
To where if I
like
read
a gut punch, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and also too, there's like a level of like, I'm super optimistic, and I was like, this is going to be a huge hit, and it's just not. So there's like a certain level of humbling, readjusting, like thinking that things are in order, and you kind of know it's going to, realizing, no, this is chaos right here. I think reading about other people's experiencing of chaos doesn't land on an emotional level like going through it yourself. So I think that, I think that often gets undervalued. But all
there's
right,
no doubt that I won't get into the merits of that poll or not, but there's certainly aspects of especially folks like me and you who are small companies, and you also have to do a lot more than just the work of delivering, right? There's a lot of things that go into making that happen. We have our own behind the scenes things that nobody else sees and nobody cares about, because my clients don't care about all the other stuff I have to do.
That's true,
right?
Well, they do.
I mean, maybe that's not fair. Maybe my
this
clients
better not
do care,
get in line of the deliverable from you.
Maybe they do care and they're empathetic or sympathetic to me, but ultimately what they want is what
results.
I promised them.
Exactly. Yeah, they want results. All right, so we got a little bit of a hot take here coming from Raj. So Raj is a PhD in geography over here at UNCG, so University of North Carolina, Greensboro, and he's saying he respectfully disagrees. Intermediate hard skills can be learned from YouTube, but not all skills can be learned outside of school. What are your thoughts? I actually disagree with this disagreement. I think that school teaches you like basic level stuff. Even in grad school, you don't start learning the more sophisticated stuff until you're, actually in an engineering role at a company and you're working with real problems. Like they might teach you frameworks, but actually, I'll keep that up. What's your take on this?
So my first thing would be to ask a question, which is, what do you mean by intermediate hard skills? Right? I mean,
I hope
that
he's
in
still
itself
on, so he can respond in real time.
I mean, in itself, that's and I know he didn't mean it to be vague, right? But to me, that's the kind of thing that leads into trouble, because it's like I immediately might assume, oh, I know what intermediate hard skills are, but he might mean intermediate hard skills for teaching, Excel or Python, right? So
here he is. So we forget that Tableau was developed in academia by researchers/professors. I don't know too much about the origins of Tableau, so
that is true.
That may be a valid point.
Yeah. Initially, it was.
Actually, though, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the groundwork, right? I mean, the groundwork of Tableau was laid in at Stanford through a Department of Defense project. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Now, the one thing is, so Christian Chabot was a student, and then Chris Stolte was one of the professors. But the third person, Pat Hanrahan, he was a professor there and a researcher, but he was also one of the people, or maybe the person, who invented the animation technology behind Pixar.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So
Huh.
that's where a lot of the visual kind of knowledge came in about the rendering side of it. And so he was very much, involved with some pretty serious, business and product aspects. So he did have the real world side of it that you were mentioning, before. That
Yeah,
he
well,
definitely brought into it.
I feel like this dichotomy that we've kind of stumbled upon of like your gut versus your theoretical frameworks. I think that's kind of the dividing line between private business and academia. Like in academia,
Mhm.
you develop these philosophies, these frameworks, but I think that's only like it's like the egg. It's like the genesis of it, but it doesn't
Mhm.
really fully grow up into adolescence to teenage to adulthood until you put it out in the marketplace and you see if it actually stands up to some wear and tear.
Yeah, and also from the academic standpoint is things change so quickly outside in the real world that it
Right.
can be challenging to frankly keep pace with how to teach those things. Just the
Mhm.
raw work of developing classroom materials, and I speak truly from experience, and I know you do too. It takes a lot of work to do that. And so uh, you could spend a whole semester creating a semester of material, right? So you're almost always behind.
Oh,
What's
I
going
have
on?
had
If you were to
to.
even attempt to do that, which is not what happens, right? Because usually it's like, and I haven't been teaching long enough to say that this is happening, but you may have somebody who creates a class and that class is taught for years, right? And nothing changes. They just do it and then it just taught, and it might not even be that relevant anymore. It's possible. I mean, I think I
So
saw that when I was in school. I felt that way
we'll
probably
see. What's
sometimes.
frustrating is that all right. So Tableau and Power BI. Power BI, I think, is updating every month. Tableau quarterly. Um,
Hmm.
I've had to re-record all of my LinkedIn lectures, which is like 60 to 80 lectures, something like that. And then right as I'm done doing this,
They change it
Tableau
again.
releases a new update, and it's like it's going to the market, and it's automatically
Yeah.
outdated. I mean, it's the Red Queen theory. You're running as fast as you can just to keep up. So I think that if I wanted to, create like more evergreen content, it needs to be the theoretical stuff, that those
Yeah.
frameworks. I think frameworks I mean, they may change. Like for example, the frameworks probably all had to shift once the internet came up. Like how to run your business
Hmm.
pre-internet is way different than now the internet spun up and you can collect all this data. Like for example, like tracking attribution for a billboard. I mean, I guess you could say go to this website, but before a website, it's like, how do you know? I guess you could ask
Right.
people and then write it down in your journal and like tally it up and
Right.
say, oh, this is where this came from. But so Raj has got, all right, Raj, another example, SAS was developed at NC State. Um, so okay, he's agreeing with us and saying that academia should be more market aware, and we've got, speaking of market aware, Matt Bratton is the VP of analytics out in for a company out in Fresno, California. So that's what I love about this podcast is that we have like academics and then we have people who are practicing like out in the field and seeing them
Yeah.
all interact.
Yeah.
It's super fun, and then also too people from all over the world too. That's cool. All right, so
Yeah. I
Noor's
think
got.
I'll just to hit on a point. I think, and this is a huge topic that I'm sure you're getting exposed to, but because academics is going to change so much for the next 5 to 10 years with everything that's happening over the last year and a half, where everything
Oh wow.
people are adapting to all. Number one, the schools are have to adapt to online because that's just from the competitive nature. What does that mean? Students who are maybe less interested in going to a university, physically, and then students who want to go to a university but live somewhere on the other side of the world and can't. And so I think that's if you look at schools, and I know not all schools think this way as a business, right? But if they look at they're a business and they have competition, and there's many, it's not just other schools that are competition, right? It's just students who might want to go to a job right away. That's
Mhm.
competition for universities. They're going to have to change. they're going to have to adapt to thinking about all these kinds of things. So I think we're going to see a lot there where they have to become more product aware and think of themselves as a product, even though they
Yeah.
might not like to think about it that way. They are.
Well, okay. I love this thread, and I just had this conversation with so I went through the startup incubator in downtown Greensboro's. It's called Launch Lab, and I just ran into the EVP, the executive vice president over at my co-working space, and I was talking to her about this idea that I'm having of an analytics apprenticeship program, because I think one of the biggest things that universities and colleges are losing out to are trade schools. Because you can say, hey, listen, you can go here for a year or two or whatever. It costs you, I don't know how much trade school costs, maybe tens of thousands of dollars versus hundreds of thousands. And out of the gate, there's way more of a demand for plumbers, electricians, skilled laborers, and you're going to be making $70,000, $80,000 a year. I mean, that seems to be a huge threat to the way that academia is set up right now. And I think that I'm wondering if there's space, if there's demand for an apprenticeship program in the technology. Like, are there? I haven't seen. Like, I just Googled it recently, and there's like kind of an apprenticeship program, but it doesn't seem to be really matured and developed.
I've seen the thing that comes to mind quickest is a company out in the UK, Information Labs.
Okay.
And I think they may have actually started something in the US, but I know they started it out there. And they basically have people come in. It's not just students, but they're students as far as this is concerned, and teach them analytics, teach them Tableau, and then they get dispersed. Either they become consultants there, or they go out and work, at clients, get a job. So there's some companies that are taking that on. Not as their sole business,
right?
But as trying to figure out how do we close that gap. I mean, everybody's heard all the statistics about how much of a shortage there is going to be in our field. How much there already is, let alone.
Okay, actually, I want you to talk about this, and we've got a question from Noor that I did want to cover, which relates us back to the storytelling thing, but. Tell us about the supply and demand differential, because I have kind of wondered about this. Do you have any sources, or like where are you getting this information from?
I've just seen it in lots of places. I think the most famous one is a report. It's a few years old. They've probably updated it from McKinsey. They were the first ones, I think, to really publish this issue, the issue about this massive shortage that was coming, and the numbers were huge. I forget what they were, but it was enough to start that people were, I would say, more from the analytics side, but I think maybe even from the university side, right? Certainly the analytics companies were able to use this as, we're going to help fix this problem because we can help you with self-service analytics, and it's going to help close the gap of people that don't know how to use analytics and things like that. So people were able to grab onto that as a kind of a sound bite, if you were to use it in its most simple terms as to how that problem could be addressed. But I think universities also used, and then you see it all the time. I mean, every day there's a headline about how the data scientist is the new sexy job, something to that effect. You could find those headlines in different publications pretty much every day, because people recognize it. I mean, it is a big gap. It's probably going to keep getting bigger. The more information that's out there, right? And information is going to get more complex too. So it's
interesting. So my intuition is that it's going the opposite way, where it's going to be easier. Like there seems to be like a core of analysts or business intelligence or data engineer. Data is in your title, and then that's the core of it. And then there's an outer ring of marketing specialists, sales specialists. They're going to have to know data as well, and it's going to be.
I agree.
yeah, it's that it's going to be interesting. I guess, yeah, at the core of it, it's going to be super complex. Like the data scientists, the data architects, they're going to be dealing with increasingly complex issues. But the way that the technology is going right now is that it's going to be distilled down so that, like, Tableau is a great example of this. Like, um, you could learn Tableau in a week, essentially, like the basics of it, and uncover a $100,000 insight. Especially if it's like
I think that's a bit of a myth. But
you think
no, I just think to get I think
interesting.
well, I think the point that you're bringing up about this, if you want to call them outer circles, is more about people whose job, say, is marketing, to get better at using data, not necessarily the tools, but to be better analysts, right?
Right.
And I think that's being an analyst is a real skill, and
Okay. I see your
I
point.
think it's a skill that you can teach, but I think being an analyst has a little bit of um, I'll say you have to have a little bit of a knack for it. I always think that your brain has to be wired a certain way. Like some people are better at writing.
Hmm.
Some people are better at painting. Some people are better, at athletically. And I think the same goes for people who are good data analysts. That they have a curiosity, they have a way about breaking down problems and thinking, and that I think you can teach a lot of that, but I think some people will just be, they're inclined toward it. And so the reason I say it's a bit of a myth to say I can learn Tableau in a week and then uncover $100,000 problem is you're not going to make a couple charts and see that. I mean, I'm not saying
So
it's
yeah, it needs that,
impossible,
you need that critical
but
thinking ability. But I guess what I'm saying is that if you stack your business acumen with some pretty basic level Tableau stuff, all of a sudden it's like you're going from a two-dimensional picture to a three-dimensional.
it's
And
better,
yeah,
but still not being an analyst. Because I'm a good marketer doesn't mean I'm a good analyst. There's something in
so
between.
okay, I'm going to push back on your pushback because I think that in order to be a good marketer, you have to be somewhat of a marketing analyst. Like, it's so data driven now that if you're not looking at the data, you're going to get left
Right.
behind.
I mean, pick a different field. I mean, HR, I mean, all these things, right? But I agree with you. You have to be
Yeah.
good, but that doesn't mean you're just going to know how to do it or that you will be good at it, right? You have to learn how
Yeah.
to be an analyst. I think being an analyst is a skill you have to teach people. You have to teach them how to
Okay,
go through the
that's
thinking
interesting.
process and how to go from thought to thought and how to, um, not how to be curious. I don't know if you can teach someone how to be curious, but I think
Mhm.
that it's like the scientific method. There's a way to go through all that data. You're not going to make 3 charts in Tableau and go, oh, there it is. I mean,
Yeah.
you could have to go pretty deep and in and out. I mean, it could take you weeks. And it's, I think that's the thing is people get sold on this idea that I can take some software and I don't care what it is, Power BI, ThoughtSpot, Tableau, whatever's coming next, and say, oh, you're just going to do this, and boom, you're an analyst now. It's all and all
Interesting.
I just think it goes much deeper than that. I think there's real skills in being an analyst, just like there's real skills in being a marketer, in being a teacher, being someone who's good at finance. I mean, those are skills you have to learn.
What are
You're
the
not just
can, what are the, like, the high levels, like, can you break those skills? Because I feel like maybe I'm taking my analytical like mind for granted here. Because and maybe it's just
are.
like a bias that I have of like, yeah, of course
Yeah,
everyone thinks this way.
most people don't think that way. I believe. uh
Interesting. Hmm.
Especially think
Interesting.
about how many people say I'm not good at math, I'm not good with numbers.
Well, I'm not good at
There's
math. The thing is, like, I guess the point that I'm trying to get across is that with, like, kindergarten level math and tool, like, something I could have learned within a week within a Tableau
Mhm.
class, I can uncover a $5 million insight in one of my clients. So it's not like but I guess what you're saying is that, yeah, that's true. Like, the skills don't. I guess that's what I'm kind of uncovering is that, like of that, like the 4 points of getting an analytics job, people overly fixate on hard skills. And it's like, look, you don't need to build a crazy algorithm with predictive modeling and all the bells and whistles. It's like, if you can, like, for example, I mean, this is an obvious one, but I had a client who was selling marine accessories, and they were holding that in stock all year round. And then I showed that they had like a $350,000 like excess inventory holding cost for like half of the year when it was cold. So like and that's just a very simple dual axis line chart in Tableau.
Yeah, I might not call that a complete, it is an analysis, but when I think of analysis, I think about really getting into understanding, I might see a symptom, or I'm trying to discover something, and I really have to go through digging through that to uncover it. You're acting like a detective, and trying to really figure out what's going on, and I think I think you may have some of those more natural skills to think that way, and that's why I think people can be analysts, but I think there's different levels, right? And again, I don't think it's something like Tableau, and I'll just go to that because I think it is a good example, helps you do that a lot faster as well, right? And I think that was really the initial vision of Tableau, is being able to move quickly and easily through large amounts of data in a visual way. That one, because visuals were good, easier to look at large amounts of data, but that the framework for how Tableau works in this drag and drop model was a more efficient way of just working. And so the goal was, look, you can be an analyst, and we want to take away the headaches of kind of organizing the data and that, but you still have to use your brain. You still have to think like an analyst. What do I want to ask next? We just want to take a lot of the hassle away from being able to get to that next step, so that you can kind of keep moving your thinking along and not get distracted by the technology and how to wrangle these cells and transform things, and all the things that you might have had to do in Excel before that were time consuming and difficult, and so on. Right now it's almost commonplace. Back then, when Tableau came out, that model didn't really exist, right? I mean, it was pretty much Excel everywhere, for the most part, and PowerPoint, but PowerPoint was the same as Excel in terms of manipulating information. It was all the same universe.
True. All right. So let's pull this one question in, and then we can close out on this one.
Yeah.
So Noah asked, why does a data analyst need to be a good storyteller? You create the dashboard after gathering and processing the data, and you send it to your manager, and that's it, right?
I'm not sure if they're being literal or being sarcastic.
See, that's as a storytelling point, nuance. You can't see tone via text.
Yeah,
so I can't tell if it's sarcasm or not.
Yeah, I mean, maybe in some companies, but if you think about what you mean to be a good storyteller, is it that, excuse me, you're upfront doing the you're doing the storytelling?
Bless you.
I'm not allergic to this question. This is a question I love. That you're up there doing the storytelling in front of a group of people, or that it has to live on its own, right? And so that I actually have to prepare it in a way that if I give it to, in your case, my manager, that they can either, one, look at it on their own without me narrating per se, that they can follow the story, they can read it and understand what's there, or if it gets sent around, that it can also live on its own without that explanation. It's not to send them a dashboard and then say, hey, I sent you the dashboard, you figure out what's going on in here.
Right.
I say that's my job as the analyst, is to present not just to make the charts, but to present it in a way that makes that next person's job easier. Not to just say, again, it goes back all the way to the beginning, what we're talking about, versus what someone asked for versus what they want, right? I might ask you for the charts. That's not what I want. What I want is answers. What I want is for you to make my job
Recommendations.
easier.
Yeah.
What I want is for you to make me look good to my boss, right? What is it that that person wants is critical to know versus what they asked you for. And that goes all the way back to that questioning and finding out from people, what are you going to do with this when I give it to you? What are you trying to get out of it? Is so, and it's going to be different in every situation too. So it's not like you can just say, oh, well, I know I did this for them last time. I'll just do the same thing again, because you don't know. Maybe it's for something different. Maybe it's for a different talk that they're doing. Maybe it's to go get VC funding for a project, or, to ask for money for some, it's always different. And you can't, if you just assume what it is, you almost always know it's coming back.
Right.
And you're going to do it again. And that's where this job gets frustrating and I think, you asked me before, how did you what was your experience? And I think that was always is we would do the work. And at some point you realize, I'm going in circles here. We're wasting a lot of time, money, energy. Nobody's happy. There's got to be a better way.
I love your analogy of see it as a product, because when I launched my learning platform, we did a beta launch. So before it was even fully developed, I was getting feedback on if I was headed in the right direction.
Yeah.
And that's how I approach building out data infrastructure and dashboards for my clients. It's like, hey, here's a prototype. I just wanted to get this out in front of you to get your take on it. And then they start interacting with it. And then a lot of times it awakens questions in them that they didn't even know they had. And then they start using it and they're like, oh, this could be really useful. So it's, it gets back to that first point you pointed out of influence.
Yeah, it's like much better if you just develop the whole thing and spend a lot of time developing it and giving it to them. And then they ask you all these questions and you have to go rework it. It's much better that way. That's definitely sarcasm, right? But that's what we do. Again, it goes back to, that's what we do is we people develop it, they build it. And what you're talking about is something that's much more agile. Hey, I'm gonna make some of it, and I know it's not finished, but I'm gonna let you use it, because I rather you find out or ask me questions or tell me something I did wrong. Maybe I didn't understand something from you. Better to get it out soon in the beginning before I spend tons of time building it, or especially trying to make it pretty, right? We spend a lot of time fiddling with pixels on these things now, right? And why do that if I'm going to tear it all down? That's just really wasted energy. So make something more functional, operational, let you try it out, see that it's good. I can always add the icing and the stuff that makes it look good at the end. That should be the last thing I worry about. But we get drawn into that very quickly. So,
well, I mean, I see that all the time in the entrepreneurship space. People will build their own business in a vacuum for I don't know, a year, 2 years, 3 years, and then put everything into it and their ego invested, and then put it out to the market, and then no one buys it and they're crushed.
Yeah.
It's like you should have done because it's the way the internet works now. Like you do the beta launches and you get feedback instead of just this huge. I mean, it also mitigates risk too. Like you could, and well, actually, this is a really good point from a kind of like a career strategy standpoint. If you are spending 100 hours building out this infrastructure that is garbage, and you have to go and spend another 100 hours again, you are wasting your company's money.
Sure.
Like you should be plugged in and you should be iterating, and that way it's like, okay, well, I hit it and it's right here, and I just need to get it right over here. And that's such a small adjustment versus, well, you're here and then you just kept going and you've way overshot it. And then not only have you spent that time building it out, but then you're going to have to undo what you did. And it's just a headache.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's and a lot of companies are doing things more in an agile fashion when they're building their real products. But when we do it with our analytics, we don't think about it that way. So that's why I kind of threw that idea out there. Is it really brings a different mindset about how do you approach your work.
Do you think that's ignorance or arrogance?
I don't think either. I think it's just a different way of thinking.
Well, the people who are building out these visualizations, either they feel like they know better, or do you understand how I'm framing up the question? Or like they don't know that that's not the way it's the most effective to approach that. Maybe it's both.
I think a lot of I think a lot of it is more legacy. The old way of doing things is it's still there, and no one's breaking that yet. And so I think there's, like anything, and it's not just analytics, right? I think any organization where it's always, well, that's just kind of how we've done it, and until someone goes in and really forces it to change, it doesn't change, right? And I think I think our space is getting ready for something similar, where analytics has to change how it does its work, not just from a technology standpoint, but from all of the things we've covered today.
Yeah, true. Well, Lee, this has been fantastic. What's the best place for people to find you?
I'm sorry, say that again?
What's the best place for people to find you?
DecisionViz.com, or I've got a YouTube channel. Just search for Decision Viz on YouTube, and those are the two best places to find me, or LinkedIn, of course.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much for your time. Also, everyone in the live chat, thanks for your questions. It just makes the conversation so much more lively and interactive. Kind of like what we're talking about with the being plugged in and iterating quickly. Like,
exactly.
If my question's going off the rails, I can have my audience come in and be like, no, this is interesting. All right. Well, I hope you have a good day, and I'll see everyone in the live chat next time. See ya.
Excellent. So long.